Hello students, and welcome to your Chapter 1 lecture. So the very first image that you see is a screenshot of me, and make sure if you're in PowerPoint you should be able to hover over that screenshot and that'll take you to a YouTube video which gives you more tips on how to view the Chapter 1 lectures. Tips on where the key content areas are, etc. So if for some reason you can't open that video where it looks like I'm like this and I'm about to kiss a baby, then go back into the Canvas site, and under the Week 1 module you'll see video resources, and under that tab this video that you see here is also available for you. So check that video out and watch that video either right now in PowerPoint or go out and look at it on Canvas before you start watching the rest of the slides. So Chapter 1, we're talking about establishing a framework for business communication. The key point here is that businesses, organizations thrive on communication. It is central, so it's important that we know how to do it. And that can be in written form, that can be in a variety of different formats. There's about 27 slides on this presentation, so I'm going to move pretty quickly. And here we go. These are your key learning outcomes. So keep these top of mind or jot these down, because your assignment for this week is going to tie back into these learning outcomes. These are the walkaways, what you should know after the Chapter 1 lecture. So information flow, this is also in my video on the very first slide, but communication goes in all different directions in an organization. Up the food chain, down the food chain, laterally to peers, within meetings, inside, outside the company. All of this happens, and you can see some of the different stakeholders that are involved at each of the different steps. Hello, yes, I'm wearing a different shirt. Now I have glasses on, and I'm in a different room. Just checking to see if you're paying attention. Actually, this slide is mostly read only. I'm not going to lecture on every single slide, so I'm hopping back onto this slide and cleaning up the language here. So know the main heading categories here on factors influencing business communication. Platforms. Teams are a big piece. Why? Companies have realized that you can get more work done when people work in teams. They kind of all hold each other accountable. And it's a way to move new initiatives through the company more quickly. When I was a product manager at Jack in the Box, we always had product teams for all of our launches. And we'd have people from different parts of the company responsible for coming together like a mini version of the company to launch a new product. And here on this slide, you see some tips on what is necessary to have a good team environment. And I'm sure some of you have worked in teams in your classes. If not, that's going to be something that you'll deal more of, and it's either something that you loved or something that you really hated. And these are some of the tips that are necessary to really be successful with a good team environment. Listening skills probably being top of the list. So I've top-lined a few things here. These are your key terms out of Chapter 1. The key terms will always be one of the first couple of slides that I cover, and that's essentially content for your study guide. There's also a study guide on Canvas, and these are key terms, and you'll have those for each chapter in the study guide. So your walkaway from the end of a lecture is that you should know all of the terms, the key terms that are listed on this slide here. If any of them are unclear, then you want to refer to the textbook. If you don't have the textbook, I guess you can refer to me. But these are your walkaways that you want to get within each chapter, and these are your key one terms. So let's cover some of these. You know, we think of the old school model of there's a sender and a receiver, and there's a message, and things get misinterpreted. Imagine a huge organization with thousands of employees, and folks from the top down are trying to communicate stuff and get it disseminated and distributed out to the entire company. There's a lot of room for things to be misinterpreted, not executed. So the key piece here is, if you're the sender of a piece of information, we're kind of whipped up these days and we're texting everybody and everything's being sent as soon as we think about it. But in business, it's very valuable to take a step back before you send the message and ask yourself questions such as, is this the right time? Is this the right channel that I should be communicating in? Do I even need to respond? Just because I got an email, perhaps it's better for me to go talk to that person face to face. So, and the message is sent, and we all know what it's like. We send emails and people don't even respond to them. Maybe your instructors do this for you from time to time. And then there's a receiver on the backside. Did they understand your message? Was it clear? If it's an employee, are they able to execute what you want them to do based on that message? Did the message come across blunt so they're actually upset by receiving the message? And there's feedback in between. You're sending a message and people are giving the feedback, thumbs up, good meeting, or I hated your email, it didn't make any sense. And if you want a quick path to not being promoted at work, be a poor communicator. Send messages with errors in them, or that they're not clear, or have meetings that languish and don't have any clear direction. Businesses thrive on communication, clear communication. So the key thing here is that you can really send messages and that they're understandable, and when you're receiving messages that you understand what is being communicated. All different types of workplace communication. And just think about some of these that you interface with. We go to meetings, we're writing messages, maybe we're sitting in teams. There's a couple here that are even more important. And I would say meetings are where a bulk of the work is done in business. So that second bullet point, attending meetings and participating in those meetings or running those meetings. Meetings are where a lot of stuff gets done because it's where you can get all the decision makers in one room and you can delegate out work and you can move decisions forward in a way that you can't do if you're trying to do that with, say, written messages. Of course, there's new tools now like Zoom and Google Hangouts and all kinds of stuff to do meetings in a digital space as well. The third point, writing messages, a lot of business communication is still in written form. And folks who, are Gen X and older, they still like to use a lot of email. Just remember this. When you write a message at work, you are leaving a written record of your attention to detail. And you've probably had the experience of reading a message from your boss or somebody else at work and it had a bunch of mistakes in it. And in that instance, it's kind of like having a conversation with somebody who's got food stuck in their teeth. You notice a problem, you're making negative judgments about the person, but you don't say anything. And at work, these types of mistakes with our written messages can really damage our image and ultimately really damage our career. So it's important to get it right when we actually take the time to sit down and do a written message. So we'll get to that later in the course when we start working on written messages. So in the ideal world, the receiving party is going to understand your message and they have everything they need to execute. It's not vague, it's not unclear, it's in a positive tone. So what prohibits that from happening? Interferences, factors that hinder communication. So we can think about that. It could be you're distracted or somebody else is on their phone or the timing's bad or you're trying to hold a meeting right after lunch and everybody's tired. So think about all the different interferences that you face at work and how do you manage those? How do you manage those interferences? How are you able to stay focused and not have those interferences get in the way? That can be even other people just soaking up your time. So this might be one of your discussion questions for Canvas this week. Think about that question. And other factors that obviously get in the way of good communication, if somebody has extreme different levels in education, or experience with a particular job, you might be talking at a level that they just don't understand. There's going to be cultural differences, language barriers, physical issues, noise, room temperatures, and a ton of mental distractions. So all of these interferences kind of have to be negated before you can sit down and have clear communication with somebody. And that's why the best way to communicate in business, the one that is the most media rich, where you have a lot of ways of getting to somebody, is face to face. You have eye contact, you have vocal variety, you have gestures, you have all of these things available that you don't have when you start using other channels like text messages or email. So face-to-face is the most media rich because it has the most tools, and it's less likely that the recipient is going to be distracted. Now, you see a light bulb on this one as well. So formal versus informal network. This is a real basic starting block for business communication. Formal is typically follows the organizational chart of the company. So it's you communicating to your boss, and then your boss communicating to her boss, and her boss communicating to her boss, etc. Right? So this typically follows the organizational chart of the company, where, say, for example, you're a brand new employee, a coordinator of the paperclip division. You probably wouldn't send a business proposal directly to the CEO of the company, right? That would be circumventing the formal communication network. You're going to send your business idea to your boss, and they're going to send it to their boss, etc. So you want to be clear about what is the network in which I'm communicating, who am I supposed to communicate with, and who am I not. So, and this can get dicey because sometimes there's a political environment that isn't clearly outlined. So you want to understand that piece. Now there's a second network, and that's the informal network, aka the grapevine, which we hear like, oh, the grapevine, I heard it through the grapevine. That's like gossip, right? Like office gossip, and who's getting promoted and who's going to get a new office, that kind of stuff. So the grapevine, informal communication network, is partly that, but it's also a valuable communication tool for managers. Just as a side example, look at how President Trump uses the Twitter, an informal communication network that's not directly tied to the White House and Congress and the Senate, that he communicates directly kind of with his constituents, his followers, through that grapevine Twitter feed, and gets kind of lobbies for things through that network. You can do the same thing as a manager. If you're getting ready to launch a new initiative, you may, before you actually formally communicate it with a meeting and a memo and all these kind of things, if you think there's going to be some potential problems, you might want to use the grapevine first and maybe float that idea out informally to a couple folks who are key communicators in a department. Maybe we would say they're gossipy or blabbermouths, and see what happens as that information gets floated out. So managers can use the grapevine, the informal communication network, to send out information, and then they also have a pulse on what's coming down the line. So a lot of the information on the grapevine in business is actually business related, about 75%. We think it's just gossip, but actually most of it is business related. So that's a question for you that could show up on your assignment. How can you use the grapevine to your advantage at work, if you're a manager or whatever? So how can that play to your favor? And then communication, formal and informal, it also flows up and down. And here you see an embedded video up top from the great movie Office Space, just a short little funny video. If you can't open it here in this slide, you should be able to roll over it, and that'll activate the YouTube link by clicking on it. But if that doesn't work for you, you can go back into the week 1 module in Canvas, and you'll see video resources under the week 1, and you can scroll down and find that video and watch that. So, but you know, communication flows up and it flows down and it flows horizontally. So how you communicate to your boss, what we call managing up, is different than how you communicate to your direct reports, your subordinates, managing down. You might be really nice to your boss and really mean to your employees. So that's the difference between upward and downward communication. And then also how you communicate to your peers. So one thing that happens in work a lot, especially large organizations, is this concept of redundant communication. And you'll see this in the video that's up top, where you get the same information from 4 different people. You might get it in a meeting and in a memo and in a video, and that's just a waste of everybody's time. So that's another question for you here, in addition to the one above it, is what ideas do you have for reducing redundant communication at work? So here's some more detail on different levels of communication. And a key piece here is intrapersonal versus interpersonal. Intrapersonal is how you communicate within yourself. So this is your own inner monologue, if you will. So interpersonal, which is most of the communication we focus on in this class, is you communicating to other folks, with written or verbal communication. So groups and communicating in groups is very different than one-on-one communication. You have group dynamics, and we'll get to that later in this lecture. And then how you communicate out to the public, your public persona, if you will, is very important. There's been a lot of examples lately of folks not getting hired or even getting fired because of content that's posted on their social media sites. So you want to be really careful, particularly if you're interviewing for a new job, or be careful of who you're friends with at work, because that information is now essentially public, and employers can look at it. Why? Because you put it out there on the internet. So really think twice about your social media content, because it is available for public consumption. Certainly there's ethical factors with communication. So, and we have this kind of grid of 4 different dimensions, and hopefully we're all working in box number 4, behavior that's legal and ethical. At work, unethical behavior does happen. Why? Because there's money involved. There's money involved, and there's competitive work environments, and that can lead to people doing shady stuff to try to move up the ladder. So we want to keep it in the lines. You should be very careful and aware of what are the company guidelines, particularly with use of email and things like office relationships. So oftentimes as a new hire, we sign a bunch of papers. We may not read all of it. We're so ecstatic that we just got a new job that we may not read through all this stuff. But in those documents, human resources might have language around there to the effect of, don't use company email for personal correspondence. And that kind of stuff can kind of bite you in the butt. So we'll talk more about these pieces in a few. So ding, 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 there's a light bulb on this one. There are diversity challenges. So now we're looking at the second learning outcome. So one of the concepts around this is this concept of ethnocentrism. And ethnocentrism is simply a country judging other countries and other foreigners, if you will, by their country's norms. Like, say, if I was an American, I would be judging other countries by how we do it in America, and judging those other countries as inferior by comparison. For example, here in the U.S., we are a low context culture. We value contracts. We assume that people show up for work on time. We assume that when we show up for a meeting, we're going to start talking about the meeting topics and not spend a bunch of time socializing. So that's all kind of U.S. ethnocentrism. So ethnic centrism, being centered on your own ethnic standards or cultural standards, is judging other cultures by your own norms. It's not necessarily bigotry. It's more of a nationalist way of doing things. Judging other countries by your standard and deeming them inferior by comparison. Luckily for us, being Americans and capitalists, much of the globe has now adopted our capitalist ideals with contracts and work ethic and hours. But in other countries, things are still different. So, body language, one of your bullet points on this slide, is a real thing. In some countries, people talk much closer to each other, and in other countries, people are more further apart. You might be in Japan where they stand at a distance where they can bow and their heads won't hit each other. So you might be in some Latin countries where people get really close and the men are like kissing other men on the cheek or things like that. And so it's very different. And here we're getting in the issues of proxemics and, you know, how much time do we spend on things like when do we start the meeting I was telling you about, chronometrics. So all these things can lead to us having judgments about different countries, and that's where we get into ethnocentrism. It also creates a lot of barriers to intercultural communication. So if you have somebody who's from a different country, maybe it's in a team, you want to ask them what's different about how you do things there, and not just assume, that would be ethnocentrism, not just assume that they do it the way that you do. Other countries as inferior by comparison. So diversity is one factor, and technology is another communication factor that we have to deal with. And things that are happening now is more people are working from home. I had a colleague who was telling me about a new business model, think Airbnb, but for business, and it's called Roam, R-O-A-M, and it's basically for the laptop generation, people who don't need to work in an office and they want to travel, but they travel to different parts of the world. Could be Bali, could be London, could be San Francisco, and they can use these network spaces. Think Starbucks, but you're actually sleeping there. And it's a new concept model based on the fact that people are telecommuting so much. So the other big piece here is social media, and I have a video up top with Mark Zuckerberg testifying in Congress, and this is quite recent. And I think we're going to see a lot of legislation coming down the line for social media networks. That's certainly in the works because they have operated mostly unregulated for many years. You know, I think in 2017, out of the $200 billion that was made in digital advertising, about half of that was between Facebook and Google. So these are really large companies, and they've been operated mostly unregulated for quite some time. So social media also has infected or certainly impacted how we communicate at work. You know, now our emails might have LOL at the end of it, which is a text message thing, right? And so there's a blurring between what's work and what's social media, and what parts of social media do we use at work. And so it's an opportunity to create new Facebook groups and ways for businesses to communicate with Twitter feeds and YouTube channels and Facebook Live conferences. So it's all out there, and it's still largely unregulated. So that's my caveat here with the social media piece. I know we all use it, and I'm just as addicted to them as you are. Here's my phone. But it's going to be changing, and there's legislation definitely coming down. And then in addition to diversity and technology, teams and the need to be able to function and interact in a team environment is paramount in business today. So synergy is the concept that 2 heads are better than 1, and 4 heads are better than 2. So if we can bring people together, each with distinct skills, and put them on a team, they can get something done a lot faster than if we have a big organization and we're trying to move things through this large organization department by department. So we certainly see this in the Silicon Valley set. So these kind of self-managed teams, giving employees a lot of autonomy. And the bottom line is this: at work, as you get out of college and start advancing your career, you're going to spend a lot of time working in teams. So learning how to do that is essential. We'll be talking about this more. Teams aren't always fun, however, right? So you probably have had some teams in other classes or other projects you've done in school, and oftentimes students say, you know, I'd rather stick hot needles in my eyes than work on a team project. So because somebody contributes more, or it's tough to get people together, or people aren't contributing at all, you end up doing all the work. These are all fears about a team environment. But when it's done well, and when you can harness everybody's strengths, teams are awesome. Teams are a wonderful way to move things forward in a way that you can't do just working independently. So how do you do that? How do you have a successful participation in a team environment? So you have to have open communication, number one. So give feedback, take feedback. You have to have team functioning. It doesn't happen right away. There's some stages that you go through. You need each person to contribute in a way that best harnesses their skills. And somebody has to run the team, right? So that's another piece of this. So a well-run team is a great thing, and we're going to talk about this more in subsequent lectures. Now, one of the things with teams and groups is that there are stages of group formation. And you'll see in stage 2 there, it shows storming. So storming is one of the actual stages of a group. So in stage 1, you're kind of forming, you're getting together, you're all strangers at this point, and then you start trying to tackle the project at hand. So, and here you're starting to formally kind of discuss maybe some different roles or how you want to tackle the project. And that leads to some conflict, what we call storming. So nobody wants to be like controlled, or you're going to be the leader. Well, maybe I should be the leader, right? And maybe we should do the project this way and not that way. So the storming is actually a healthy and necessary part of team formation. And then what comes out of that, ideally, through the storming piece, is you get into some norming. So we can accept each other's viewpoints. Everybody's got something to say here. Roles are starting to be established. And then you get into the performing stage, where everybody's got a clear role and everybody's doing their piece. So in the hierarchy of the actual team is no longer of key importance. So because everybody's contributing equally, so there really is no, quote, one leader. So that could be a question for you on your assignment about what does this slide tell you with regards to having conflict early in the group process. A popular form of teams today at work is cross-functional self-managed teams, which is a fancy term for kind of a mini version of the company itself. When I was a product manager at Jack in the Box, I led teams of people with the responsibility of launching new products at work. And on those product teams, we would have somebody from purchasing and marketing and operations and distribution and finance, the research and development, R&D kitchen area. And collectively, our team was basically represented all the different divisions of the company. And that's where the term cross-function comes into play. Cross-function, meaning folks from different departments, functional departments, a mini version of the company itself. And what that enables is that those people on the team who represent their functional departments can make decisions on behalf of their department versus one individual person who's trying to move an initiative through all those different departments is very time-consuming. So cross-functional team, and then self-manage means they manage themselves. So they don't have to report to a whole bunch of different bosses, and that speeds up their decision-making process. So companies are trying to reduce their layers of management, one, because it's less expensive, and two, because by empowering employees, they can manage themselves, and if we do it properly and incentivize them, then we can make decisions faster and get more nimble in the marketplace. One of the ways that companies execute cross-functional self-managed teams, they don't necessarily go together. Cross-functional self-managed teams and matrix organizations can be two separate things. But one way that they execute cross-functional self-managed teams is through a matrix organizational structure. This is what I had at Jack in the Box. At Jack in the Box, we had a matrix structure. And a matrix structure basically is this. Say I work in purchasing, and I'm a purchasing manager, and I'm responsible for buying all of the animal proteins for this company. And I report to the director of purchasing. I'm a purchasing manager, and I report to the director of purchasing. But as a purchasing manager who purchases all the animal proteins for the company, we're pretending like it's Jack in the Box, I also sit on 3 different product teams. And those product teams are working on launching new products. And those new products need things from purchasing, like, hey, we're looking at buying this new type of chicken nugget, or we're looking at buying this new type of sirloin for use in a new product. So as a purchasing manager, I can represent the purchasing department on that team. That team is led by a product manager, somebody who's responsible for managing that team and getting the product launched. So the question is this: if I'm a purchasing manager, who's my boss? Is it the director of purchasing, or is it the product managers on the teams that I sit on? And the answer in a matrix organization is it's both. So both of those people are your manager. And you can see how this can get complicated when you have a matrix organization structure. You have what's called dotted line reporting. You report to one person with a dotted line to somebody else. And that's what's shown in this slide here. Typically, your primary reporting is still to the person, the director of the department you are in, but then also a dotted line to the product manager. And matrix organizations, typically, you're on that team for a specific length of time until that product is launched, and then you go and you sit on other teams. Whereas a cross-functional self-managed team could be a permanent team structure. Okay, so that's your key terms out of Chapter 1. So in reviewing your learning outcomes for Chapter 1, you want to answer these 2 things. First off, your first key learning outcome is be able to explain how information flows in an organization. And we talked about up and down and sideways and how it can be written. And, so there's a lot of ways information flows. It can be formal, it can be informal. And you see some of the questions related to this learning outcome listed below here. And these are all fair game for your Week 1, Chapter 1 assignment. The second learning outcome, be able to identify communication challenges with regards to diversity, technology, teams, and other factors impacting communication. So here you see questions around diversity challenges, technology challenges, and team challenges. So these questions could also be fair game for your Week 1 assignment. So take some time, if you haven't already, and think about each of these questions for the first learning outcome as well as the second learning outcome. Jot down some notes, and have those notes in front of you before you actually dive into the Week 1 homework.
All right, here I am once again doing my Superman change into a new shirt, new glasses, new room. You have one assignment this week, Week 2. Starting in Week 3, next week, you're going to see quizzes coming up each week. But for this week, you have just the Week 2 discussion. If the link on this slide doesn't work, you can obviously go into Canvas, go to the Week 2 module, and underneath that module, you'll see assignments listed there and the discussion listed there. So thanks for listening. All your assignments are due Sunday before midnight. They're available until the following Monday, but they are 10% off late deduction after the Sunday deadline. After Monday, the assignment closes and you forfeit those points, and I don't do late extensions on assignments. So please follow that. Make sure you get things done on time. And remember, you can always work ahead of schedule. Thank you. Bye-bye.